Hi, and welcome to Partners in Progress, a couples podcast about love, life, and well-being in your 20s with me, Elouise.
And me, Sammy.
In this podcast, we'll be discussing topics like relationships, health, well-being, spirituality, and just life. From tips and tricks to failures and falls, all while sharing our story as we try to figure out building and growing a life together in the chaos of modern-day society. We'll be coming to you every Sunday with our shares and invite some guests to share their experiences too. So grab a blanket, a cuppa, and settle in to Partners in Progress. Hello and welcome back to Partners in Progress. So we're filming this, recording this on an evening again, so we'll see if our brains can keep up with things as well as we normally do.
I'm slightly more alert today, so hopefully I'll actually be able to think of things this time.
So today we're going to be talking about our relationship to nature, which is really special and really kind of key part of the podcast, and it will be a kind of constant theme that comes up because it's something that's very embedded into both our lives and it has been in and out of the relationship that we have. So I thought, what better way to start than talking about the beginnings of our connection to nature and relationship to nature. And I think it's important to mention just about the fact that nature is kind of what I do. I have Wellbeing in Nature, which is like my online work where I talk about seasonal living and how we can use nature as this kind of healing and supportive relationship that can make us feel better. So it's something that's very close to our hearts, and it's something I have obviously experienced in terms of having my own relationship with nature, but also I have done a lot of studying and research within this field throughout my degrees. It was kind of my center point focus for particularly my master's degree. My dissertation or research project, whatever you want to call it, is the kind of UK project that you do that's like makes up quite a significant proportion of your degree. So I have done all the research and I have lots to say about it. And I know, Sammy, you do as well.
Yes, I have had quite a few different types of relationship with nature as well, I feel like. So I can start on that if you want.
Yeah, I think it would be good to kind of talk about like how nature first kind of, I don't know, how you first formed this connection and then relationship with nature. Perhaps maybe just talking about like, I know a lot of it was quite present in your childhood and adolescence. So
I was going to say I've got my three phases of my different connections with
three
nature.
phases.
I've already planned this out. I like my phases to split things up, even though there's a bit of overlap. But yeah, so my first sort of connection with nature, there's definitely kind of when I was younger, a lot of it came from spending time in nature with my family because I always used to love going for walks around the village that we lived in, and also we went to Sweden a lot, kind of 6 weeks of pretty much every year, and we had a little house out there that was very much in the middle of the woods. So you would walk right outside and you were just surrounded by forest on pretty much every side. So I think pretty much it was like every weekend we'd have a little family walk around in our village, and whenever we were in Sweden it was pretty much every day or so, really just getting out. And I didn't always enjoy it, which is what I found interesting. I was more like, oh, I guess I'll go because they're like, oh, you should come outside and go on a walk, it'll be good for you and all that sort of stuff. And I was like, oh, fine. But I remember at that age I always tried to make it more enjoyable by relating it to whatever video game I was playing at the time. So I remember like Mario Kart, I'd do it with time trials to try and speed the walk as fast as possible, which my parents didn't always enjoy.
What age were you when you're talking about like that resistance and like the Mario Kart? What age were you?
I mean, probably from like 6, 7 at the youngest, all the way up to like 10, 11ish. I think that's this whole when this phase lasted for me. I think so. I don't think I was ever like the one who was like, oh, absolutely, let's go on a walk today. It's definitely the main thing I want to do. But I always kind of went because when you're a kid at that age, you just kind of doing what your parents tell you to do. So you're like, okay, I guess we're going outside now. And I really did enjoy that because I think it like looking back on it again, it's like at the moment you're like, oh, I just want to play my games or do whatever I want to do rather than this. But I think it was a really healthy way of kind of getting exercise and just talking to like as a family and spending that time together really in a different setting than just indoors all the time, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's different in a positive way. But that's my first phase. I can go on to the second unless you want to. Well, you haven't got your phases. I don't know if you do or not.
No, I think it'll be good if you like kind of just talk about like how the relationship developed for you in all the phases, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Well, then phase 2, as I like to call it. I don't know any snappy names or anything for them. But this was kind of from when I was sort of 11 to 14, 15-ish, I think, because that's when I kind of stopped going on those regular walks with my family as much, because you're a young teen and you're like, oh no, I must be cool and independent. And yeah, exactly. And being an only child, I think I felt that independence even more. So I was like, no, I just kind of want to do my own thing in a sense. But that relationship kind of evolved to then spending time with like friends in nature and going out, because again, living in a village, there wasn't much to do in terms of going to a city when none of your friends can drive or you can't really get out of where you are. So a lot of the evenings at that age were spent being outside playing football or just kind of wandering around and playing random games out and about.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a different relationship, because it was more just spending time with your peers really and developing that relationship in that sense to each other. But I always felt like being outdoors and playing other games and things were a really good way of facilitating more interesting conversations and building friendships a bit more. So it became more of a social part of my life then, rather than just something I had to do or like something I had to go outside and be in. So I've got like, I think I've told you this before, but again, walking around the village whenever I've gone with you, is like I've got memories for pretty much everywhere of like time I've spent with friends around that age. And I just really kind of like that in a sense, because it's nice to be able to associate like random trees with things that have happened and stuff like that.
It's interesting how, and again, I'm already getting psychological here, but
Only took 6 minutes.
I know. It's just interesting how like these different phases are so like common in the way that like children and adolescents develop, like that turning point when you go from kind of viewing the world from everything your like parents or grown-ups around you are teaching you and guiding you, to kind of shifting towards like the peers, and your worldview kind of expands, doesn't it? And
yeah,
so it's just interesting how nature kind of followed you through your developmental milestones almost.
yeah, I think that's what I definitely associate with it now, because I know you've spoken about those milestones to me again separately, and I've definitely associated that with my relationship with nature. But I guess you could argue that's because a lot of my life was spent just kind of outside around that age anyway, so it's bound to happen in that environment.
Yeah.
But that brings me on to the last phase 3, which is pretty much from that 14, 15-ish to pretty much current day, really.
Wow.
So that age was when I started kind of experiencing anxiety and a bit of things around mental health of kind of affecting me, even though I didn't really realize it initially. Like I didn't kind of realize what it was for about a year or so. I just thought I had these weird feelings that no one else did. But a main way that I kind of found to cope with that was initially through music, because that's when I really got into music and kind of making it and listening to it and a lot of things like that. And that really went hand in hand with, I just started kind of going on walks by myself. So I kind of came full circle, which I always find funny, with my parents dragging me out initially for like half an hour walks, and we'd be like, oh, that's so far. And then eventually around that time, I just walked for like hours and hours, just kind of by myself, just like 2, 3, 4 hours, depending on how much else I had on.
Yeah.
4 hours were, nothing else was really happening. But yeah, just really kind of enjoying being in nature and connecting to it and listening to music and all of that. And I do feel like the music was a big factor of how I kind of connected to nature in a new way. I think I couldn't necessarily go for walks for that long and without listening to music. I think I just kind of get not bored, but I think I'd just be like, oh, I just want to kind of be back inside otherwise. But
yeah,
not like straight away, but I don't think I could walk for like 2 or 3 hours, just unless it's like a proper like hike or something like that. But just a walk around a village that you know everything anyway, it's like having the music was what made it different and unique and fun. And I think, again, it's like I did it all by myself, but I also did still spend a lot of time in nature with like friends at this time as well. This was the time that I started having more of an independent relationship with nature as well, and that I kind of did it for health reasons, I guess
Yeah.
physically as well, in the sense of walking is good for you, but mentally mainly.
So what was it about nature that you kind of feel related or like associated with like an anxiety reliever almost from how you're describing it?
I think a big anxiety trigger for me at that time, and again, it's only from looking back that I realize this now, but it was really just being stuck is an odd word, but like being in a situation that I couldn't get out of, or like being in a room that you weren't allowed out of. So it's like exams are really bad for me, like assemblies and things like that. I just kind of start having panic attacks because it's like you're in this room with all this people and you have to be there for a certain amount of time. And I think that's when my brain would just start worrying on like, what if you like have a panic attack or feel like you need to be sick or anything like that? And I guess nature is the complete opposite of that, because there's no room, there's no walls. The whole world is your room, so you can't really, you don't feel boxed in, you don't feel kind of claustrophobic is not
Enclosed.
quite the right word. Yeah, enclosed is a better word. And there's no real pressure to do or be a certain way for a certain period of time. So I think that was what really helped me, because it's like I could spend as long as I wanted, except for if it went pitch black in winter, which is another separate thing. But I think having that freedom and that just kind of choice, and it was all kind of in my control of like how long I was out and what I was doing. I think it was that sense of control and freedom that really helped alleviate anxiety and helped me feel a bit better, even if for a while, because it was just come back. But
Yeah, and I suppose like if you were to have a panic attack or feel like an increase of symptoms, nature isn't going to judge or react.
exactly, yeah, because I think that was another thing with the anxiety at that point, is it was kind of a fulfilling cycle in a sense, because it's like having a panic attack means people are going to focus on you and you've got to make a scene to cope with it. And that's what would trigger them sometimes, because it's the thought of, oh, if I do have one, then all these things have to happen. And I did have to do things a few times, and it's just like, it definitely didn't help. But yeah, like you say, in the nature scenario, it really just frees you to, if anything was to happen, then you'd be fine. And again, in the opposite of the self-fulfilling way, I never really did have any outside when I was by myself in that way, because it's just like there's no one to judge you having a panic attack or be stressed about you having one, so you're going to be fine. So yeah, that's kind of my 3 phases of nature. I mean, the last one's kind of evolved now because I don't suffer from anxiety anywhere near that level now, so it's more just for the enjoyment of it. But I think that initial enjoyment has kind of carried on in a different form of just, I can appreciate being out for the fresh air, for listening to music, and it is calming, but I think in a different way now that it's not like my anxiety related around that sort of thing.
So how would you describe, or like what words would you use to describe your relationship to nature in that time when you were like dealing with heightened anxieties to now where you're not so much?
I think calming is the biggest one I can think of, really. I don't know if that quite fits the bill of what you're asking about. Like, I just feel like nature had the really calming effect on me, and that was the main part of its relationship with me. But equally, just freeing as well, and like freedom, and that sort of just sense of there not being any pressure or anything. It was all just kind of in your control, and free in the sense of there's kind of infinite space, really. So it's all, it's all yours, but you can just spend as much time as you want there and feel a bit away from everything. So just kind of a
Yeah.
peaceful sense of it as well.
And when you talked about music, that kind of enhanced your experience, which is quite interesting because I feel there's lots of different opinions on listening to music when you're out or just listening to being in nature. So it's interesting that it kind of enhanced your experience at that time as well.
Yeah, well, I really think that for me, they're very connected, like music and nature, because I always think I haven't fully listened to like an album or a song unless I've listened to it while I'm walking outside.
Interesting.
I don't feel like I get that full experience unless I've got listening to it in that way with like both earphones in and just I'm the only one around, which is a very specific set of circumstances.
Yeah.
To be like, I have only listened to it under these. But I think it's just that it lets you have that real full connection to the song or whatever you're listening to. And I think that's what really makes it feel like, oh, I'm actually listening to this and I'm fully immersed in it, I guess is the best way of describing it. And I think that also kind of helped with the anxiety from like a distraction standpoint, because it helped me get fully immersed in the music or whatever I'm listening to really kind of clear the mind away from all the busy thoughts that would be triggering anything else, you know?
Yeah, and I feel like music can help you process your emotions as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, again, when you have songs that can either say what you feel or sound like what you feel, it really helps you understand what you're feeling, because there's not really a unique experience in a sense for people. And I think that's good, because it means people can relate to you or vice versa, which really helps you understand yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Anyway, I've got pretty deep with this pretty quickly. Only
Yes,
15 minutes
that's the
a day.
plan. That's what we're here for.
But I think that's pretty much all of my thoughts on my kind of connection to nature.
Well, I want to ask you just a
Or you
little
can ask
bit
me some more
more.
questions.
Just because it is like, a deep dive, isn't it?
That's true.
Because I don't think what you mentioned is the actual type of nature that you were around or experienced at those different phases. Like, I know you said it was like villagey, but obviously like the whole kind of thing of wanting to, like, not feeling like you've experienced a full music album unless you've done it in nature, but certain nature settings I imagine would probably be more would differ that experience. Like, for instance, a kind of like tropical rainforest would probably have a very different experience of listening to an album to a quiet like field or meadow. I feel like there's different kind of levels.
Yeah, no, that's really a good point. I think that's the thing. When I say nature, I've always got like a picture of what I mean in my mind, but I forget not everyone's going to have that same mental picture. How rude of them.
I know.
But for me, I think it can kind of take a few forms, really. I think the main ones are really just, I love a big field.
Oh, you do love a field.
You know how much I love my fields. Because again, in the village I grew up, there were quite a few of those around. If there's a big field with a big tree in the middle, that's always a double whammy of a winner for me. So it kind of gives that landmark. And I think it's just, again, that feeling of like freedom and being able to see for quite a long distance and just see nature all around you really makes you feel like fully immersed in it for me. But on the opposite end of that, another one that really means a lot is like a forest or a woods, because especially in Sweden, we lived near just a little kind of footpath that would go through the woods and then up to this viewpoint called Utsikten.
Great pronunciation. Your mom would be so proud.
I know. If there's any Swedish listeners, I've got to make sure I do it right or I'm going to get slated. So it was a really nice just kind of connection around all those trees, I think. So it's kind of the complete opposite of the field, but you can feel immersed in nature in different ways. It just depends on, for me, I think it's how much you can see of the nature around you, and if it's all encompassing, I think, in whatever form that takes, which is easier for a forest, I feel like, because you just put a lot of trees everywhere and you can't see anything else.
Yeah.
But for a field, you kind of need about 5 other fields around you, and then you're like, oh, I'm fully in it. Because if it's only a field and then there's like a road next to it, it's like, well, it's not really,
quite the same.
Not quite naturey enough for me.
Well, I've been to where your family like have their housing in Sweden before, and I remember it's quite similar to like the British woods and stuff that we have here, except it's so many more birches and pines, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, there's like pines are the main ones in the kind of main bit of the forest, but you just have birches on the edges like everywhere, at least where we are. So,
but I remember for the first time I like stepped into the Swedish woods, it was so striking because the floor was really mossy and it was like this vibrant green, like idealistic moss, the type that you imagine in those kind of fairy books or anything where you like your feet sinks into it.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling like it was quite similar to Britain, but also very different in the way that moss just covered like the grounds everywhere, and it was just so like, oh my god, like it just felt so squishy and so nice. I remember just thinking that was so amazing.
Yeah, I still remember kind of one of the first times going through there, and we walked mostly because there is kind of a little like footpath that went through most of it, but there is this moss all the way along it, like right on either side. And the first time I fully like stepped in it, and it's just like it sinks like an inch or 2 inches, like when you go into it. And I don't know if it's the first time, but the first time I can remember is like probably 5 or 6, and I was just like, oh my god, I'm gonna sink all the way.
Oh,
I thought it was
you
like
too
quicksand
little.
or something, but yeah, it's a really kind of odd sensation, but I think you've summarized it really well from what you described of it.
I think it's different, isn't it? Because I'm kind of the outsider perspective in that I feel like I'm very much a visitor to Sweden, whereas it's so embedded in your upbringing that it's less like that, I think.
Yeah, because again, it's like I've been there like 6 weeks pretty much every year, really. So I think that's why I feel like deeper connection to that also being a form of nature to me, like as in one of my key visualizations of what nature is. But I think it was really interesting to see it from your perspective as well when you came over, because it is nice seeing things that you're so familiar with a new kind of viewpoint, I think.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely beautiful. And I feel like in our first few years when we were still we still had stories to tell. We're at that point now where our stories are, oh, you were there, never mind.
Things that happened about 3 years ago while we were both at. Yeah.
But the initial, I just remember so many times, especially when it's talking about like emotional experiences, you were like, oh, so when I was in Sweden or this time in Sweden, just came up so often, because I just feel like because you went kind of the same time every year, it kind of gives you this timeline, doesn't it? Because it's like you kind of away from your everyday environment, and I feel like it deepens your awareness of the time passing, and then the last time you were there, I feel like I can imagine. I mean, obviously I haven't had somewhere like that. I've just kind of been in the same kind of place, but that's how I feel like it comes across.
Yeah, it's pretty accurate, I think, because the first thing you think of every time you get there, well, every time I got there, is what was happening the last time I was there.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of, as it goes on, because we'd be there for like 2 weeks over Easter and 4 weeks over summer. So the longer it goes on, it feels like this is just the home you've been in forever, especially over summer with the 4, sometimes even like 5 or 6 weeks that we'd spend there. It just kind of becomes your home, and then you only kind of leave it again. It feels very different from like a quote unquote normal holiday, I guess, because it is somewhere that you've been there for however many previous years, and you've been there for so long this time, and then you're leaving again. So it is kind of leaving like a second home in a sense.
Yeah.
But because you come back for those same times each year, like you've said, you remember like, oh, this happened this year and this happened this one. So you've got a lot of different connections with the same place over however many years, which is kind of, it's something that you can only really associate with like your home. If you've lived there for however long and then you move out, you're like, oh, I remember this kind of happening then, but it's still slightly different given that you're there for most of the time. So you don't have that time away to kind of disconnect from it in a way, but still want to be there too.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. All right, shall we move on to my story?
I think so. I've taken up enough time with mine, so you can talk
You
about
take
yours.
up all the time. We just changed the episode name to Sammy's Nature Story.
Sammy jabbers about Sweden and nature for 3 hours.
Well, we probably will do an episode like fully on your kind of Swedish background and how that's kind of influenced your lives, I think, because I think there's so much there that we could talk about.
Yeah.
But for now, we will move on to my nature story, I suppose, and my relationship with nature and how it's evolved over time. And I've mentioned before, I grew up in Milton Keynes, which is quite a unique place in that it's quite young, and it was basically 4 villages that formed, and kind of it's still developing now, so I'll use the present tense, to become what is now the city of Milton Keynes, which is really weird because when I was growing up it was a town, so I'm still not used to it being
Gotta like change your internal vocabulary for
I know.
it.
So I mean, a lot of my relationship changed in the same way that you had your kind of village was where you spent so much of your life. I had the same kind of roughly the same area. I lived in two different houses, but I lived in the first one only until I was about 3 or 4 years old, I think. Maybe a bit older. I don't actually know. But I don't really have too many memories of that time. But it was connected to the same river that I did actually grow up on. So that shows you it wasn't really that far. And we grew up with dogs in the house. So in the same way that your family dragged you out, my family did as well, because the dog needs walking every day. And my parents were really good at kind of teaching us responsibility and how to care for animals, which I think is such an important lesson for children to learn. So it wasn't long until I started being kind of, I'd go take the dog out as part of kind of my, well, not really my job, but it was kind of whoever's in the house got to take the dog out, and we had a border collie for most of my teenhood, at least.
They're not going to let you get away without a walk in a day.
2 walks.
2 walks in a day.
Border collies need 2 walks a day because they are extremely high energy. Well, at least our one was. And it was only a little one in the morning, but I would take her out in the afternoon. And so I was always kind of encouraged to be out. I have pictures of me as literally like a little gremlin baby who doesn't even look big enough to walk, but is walking around. And my dad would just take us out because when I was a baby, we had 2 dogs in the house, and my older sister and me. My parents kind of split it. So my mum would be working when my dad was looking after us, and vice versa. And so my dad was like, right, let's get them out, get them on a long walk, tire everybody out so that it's a bit easier. Which meant that I had nature as part of my life from the get-go, like from birth, basically. But I feel like I had obviously, because of that, I had a connection and experiences of nature, but I don't think I really had a relationship with nature that I was kind of consciously aware and nurturing of until I was maybe kind of around 11 or 12. And this is the period when I would take the dog out on my own for walks, like after I came back from school, because everyone else had more going on in their afternoons. I just came back from school, had a cup of tea, and off I went. And I did have that same experience you had where I, hang out with friends in nature as well. But I think most of my memories, and because for me, nature is a spiritual place for me, I think a lot of my kind of memories come from being on my own, and it was kind of where I went for every emotion, like because it was routine. I soon clocked onto the fact that, like, oh, I actually feel better when I'm in nature, and I feel, I don't know, it just felt like a place of connection. Almost, I kind of talk about it almost like it was my church. It was like the place that I could kind of go to in any time of need, in any time of celebration. It was just where I could go. And I remember so many emotional experiences that I had while walking around. I feel like I made every major life decision and small life decision in nature. I remember walking around and kind of thinking about what GCSEs I want to take and what I wanted to do for my degree and all these different things. So it was the place that I went to for answers. And like I said, it was very kind of much a spiritual connection. So when I was a little bit younger, I thought I could control the wind. I was like insistent that it matched my energy, it matched my mood. And if I was like overcome with like frustration or heightened energy, the wind would pick up. And it almost felt like without realizing, I feel like I visualized the wind picking up my emotions and releasing them. And that was just like one of the ways that I felt it was a spiritual place for me. And that was when I really realized how important nature was to me and my life, and how I wanted it to be part of my life in any way it could possibly be. And Yeah, I mean, I loved my river that I grew up in. As you know, I love my river. And it just felt so special, and that kind of relationship has only really deepened from that point, and I still kind of view it as my spiritual place, my spiritual respite, I suppose. But it's interesting because when I came here to Nottingham for university, my relationship kind of changed in the way that I was less able to kind of go out in nature because I was suddenly in like this massive city. And where I went to uni, which was Nottingham Trent University, is literally in the city centre. So I used to travel back quite a bit. So I'd normally go for walks when I got back. And there was the Arboretum, which is a beautiful place in Nottingham that I absolutely love. And I would walk through there on my way to uni, but I definitely felt my relationship to nature kind of went on the back burner a little bit. Like I didn't lean on it as much as I had in previous years because I was so, it was just life taking over. You're at uni, so you're doing all the uni things and focused. It's harder to get out when there's not a dog that needs walking.
Yeah, that you've got to motivate yourself rather than have this dog being like, right, come on, time to go.
Yeah, it's time to go out. So I definitely felt like it kind of dropped off for those kind of years of university. And then I feel like it kind of picked up again when I studied my master's degree, and I obviously did my research project, and I started learning about the psychology and the science behind our relationship with nature, and how there are like physiological and psychological impacts to being in a nature setting, which was so fascinating. And it gave me this extra respect and appreciation for nature. And that's kind of when I started kind of weaving it into my work, in terms of the online businesses and doing coaching and things like that, and kind of advocating for it. Like my Instagram feed is literally just full of nature reels and posts. It's just everywhere.
It's kind of the best it can be, I think. If you're getting that and nothing else, probably just quite peaceful and calming on social media compared to most people.
Yeah. So it kind of took on a different perspective. And I remember when we moved to Reading, we were really detached from nature. And I started kind of finding ways of bringing nature into our home. So the joy of houseplants began, didn't it?
I was going to say that's when we got about 3 or 4 different ones at once. Some of them lasted for a really long time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was trying to think. I was going to say we have one still with us, but I don't think we do.
Not from Reading.
We had a spider plant that lasted us a good long while, but
I missed that plant.
Yeah.
Anyway,
sidebar. Sorry.
So that was again where in Reading, I felt like I added another kind of layer to it in terms of realizing how we can connect to nature. And I just had this big realization moment where I was like, oh, everything is nature. Like if you look around your home, you've got furniture that's built from nature, and in your fridge it's full of plants, and everything can be taken back down to nature. And so it allowed me to find ways of bringing it into the home and start advocating and helping people find ways of bringing nature into their environment, no matter what situation they were in. But yeah, I think and now we obviously are in our home and we are quite close to a woods. And I think we moved in here in June of last year, didn't we? Was it June?
Yeah, it was June or July, I think. We actually moved in. I think it was right at the end of June, yeah.
Yeah, it was around your dad's birthday, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, it was.
And I think because we had so many things, it's just one thing after another, isn't it? We haven't really committed to being out in nature and going to that woodland as much as both of us would probably like.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we've had sort of weeks, or I was going to say months, weeks is probably more accurate, here and there, where we've actually gone a decent amount, but then it's kind of dropped off the next week just from life being busy in various other ways. So I think that's something that we've both spoken about in 2025, wanting to really kind of reconnect with that space in nature.
Yeah, and we've mentioned it on like last week's episode. We spoke about wanting to go out walking more, haven't we?
Yeah, it ties into this quite neatly, really.
Yes, we are smooth and know what we're doing.
Fully professional now, tying things back. So
so it's definitely something. I mean, I don't feel like I've ever lost my relationship to nature, but it has taken different forms in the same way I think it has for you.
yeah,
But what has kind of remained is that I have this like spiritual link to it. And even if I'm not in nature, I still find ways of kind of connecting to it and leaning on it. And whether it's in kind of meditation or just looking out my window or planning our garden, you know, I always find ways of connecting to nature, which I think is really important. And I think both of us as well, as the years have gone on, we've both tried to do more in terms of like sustainability.
yeah. I mean, I've been quite inspired by you on that one, to be honest. But I think I would have got there on my own anyway. It just would have taken me longer. I think that's the way for a lot of things, really. But
yeah, sorry, I
no,
just said about
that's
the same time as you. I was like, I picked it up from your sentence,
you
and that was
can
kind of weird.
supersede mine because I didn't have a continuation to the sentence.
Crazy. But yeah, what I was going to say is that I think when I was learning of the kind of eco-psychology, which is the study of nature, basically, in terms of the psychological.
And then psychology.
Exactly.
It all makes sense.
It does. And this word kind of, obviously you see the word connection and relationship come up, and you kind of use them in an interchangeable way, but really they are different in terms of a relationship is a give and take. It's something that you nurture, and a connection is something you kind of have, and you can feed it. But I do feel like a relationship kind of shifts how you perceive this tether to nature. And that's where the kind of sustainability motivation comes from. And we are so far away from perfect. There are so many ways that we could do better sustainably. But I think it's a case of you just do what you can at the time. And I think what we're trying to do is just gradually introduce more sustainable methods and different ways of giving back to nature where we can.
Yeah, I think that's the best way of looking at it, because you can't do everything all at once. Otherwise, you'd kind of no longer have a house. You'd be living outside in the middle of nowhere and living off of the most minimal things. But I think doing what you can, given everything else you've got going on in life, is the best step. Because if you're giving some energy to it, as much as you can, really, then at least you're helping improve the earth and making that nature that you enjoy so much stick around longer and be even happier. And that's a really key part of it.
And it's kind of going back to, our ancestors and how nature was such a key part of life. It was how people formulated and create and kind of, what's the word, like it's how it guided how they lived their life, the wheel of the year and the different turning points, and knowing when to plant things, when to harvest things, when to stock up on things. Nature was so essential in our like ancestral history. And I think a lot of us are kind of trying to go back to that now. And that is why this word relationship feels so important to me, because it is a relationship. It's not something we just take. We can't always just go out to nature, get all the stress relieving properties from it and leave it there. We want to be kind of giving back in some ways as well, even if it's just saying like a thank you when you leave the woods, just showing gratitude. One thing I like to do, which is very witchy woo-woo of me, is always try to touch a tree whenever I'm outside, because all the trees are connected underground with their roots, and they, help each other. So by touching one tree, you're connecting to the whole network of nature around you. And it's almost like I'm offering like a slice of my energy back as a kind of piece of gratitude. And it's a really simple thing, but it does feel like it kind of represents what I'm talking about when I'm using the word relationship with nature, because I think it is really important I think that's the way that we are going to heal as a planet, is building those relationships again. And we've shut our walls off and things from nature, but now we're starting to open the window and start letting the air in. So yeah.
It's a good
Time.
metaphor, that.
It really is, isn't it? Look at that. I'm great at wording things.
But no, I do really like what you said about kind of physically connecting back in a way as well. Because I remember sometimes if I was in a field or something like that, it was really quiet and I knew no one else would be around, I'd just kind of lie down sometimes. Not for long, but is that, again, that feeling that you're physically connecting with it somehow. Grounding, it feels like you do get some sort of energy from it, and that's coming from someone who's not super into that sort of stuff. But I do definitely feel like there is that energy there, which, I mean, again, there is scientifically some sort of energy there. So
there is, yeah.
I think I really feel like, and like you say, if you feel like you're giving that energy back with intention, then it does help. I don't know, it does feel like it's doing something.
It's reciprocity, isn't it? It's that give and take.
Yeah.
That I think is so important. But yeah, I think that kind of is a good point to kind of start shifting away. I think next week we are going to dive into how we kind of live seasonally and talking about the Wheel of the Year, which I'm really excited about.
This is something you know quite a lot about, so I'm excited.
Yes, and you've kind of started coming into the world of seasonal living, haven't you?
I'm the little student poking my head in, but I am really enjoying it.
Maybe more apprentice, because I feel like I certainly don't feel like I have the seasonal living to the level that I want it to. I feel like I've still got a ways to go of how much I want to have it present in our life. So it's something we're still building, but it's a really fascinating and special way of living. So I'm really excited to be talking about that. But before we head off, I want us to do our Wellbeing segment.
Yes.
If you are ready.
I'm ready.
But I think I'm going to... You're steady.
Sorry, guys.
I think I'm going to actually change the wording of it a little bit, because I feel like we've struggled to answer some questions sometimes, I think. So I'm going to keep the second question the same, but the first question is going to be, what is something that gave you some joy or a well-being boost this last week?
Oh, that's a really nice one.
I know. I thought, just release some serotonin.
In the last week, well, again, it's not long after we recorded the last one, really. So it's still, the last week kind of contains my family coming up to visit and just spending time with them for my birthday. So that's just been the biggest thing that's kind of given me joy. I think being able to see them again and just having them and be able to host them in our home for the first time properly really does feel like it's brought me joy. Can you think of like one moment specifically? My apologies. I'll be more specific.
No. Yeah, that is fine. It's just I was wondering if you can think of like one moment.
I think, yeah, actually, still not quite a moment, but I can decide a moment. I've made my mind up now. I think when we had them over for breakfast the next day they were here, and when they kind of wandered in and saw all the different food that we've had for them, to be able to host them properly, as they all just seemed really happy with that. I think that just made me feel really happy as well, because they've done so much to help us with being able to kind of get to where we are, but also they've visited us a lot of times in various places, and we've not always been able to host them in the fanciest way. So being able to fully just have everyone sit down for a really nice morning meal together just felt really special, and that initial moment just kind of encapsulates all my feelings around that, I think.
Yeah, it was so lovely, wasn't it, to have them and be able to kind of look after them, I suppose, and let them relax. And I think because obviously our living situations have changed so much, it was nice to have them be like comfortable and not have to worry about anything.
Yeah, not squished in or anything as well. There's enough space for everyone happily, not like student accommodation or a pretty like flat situation. So.
And our home being like our home, isn't it? Because it's been like a process of, and we're still got plenty of house projects, but it definitely feels like a home now. So it's nice to be hosting in that kind of environment.
Yeah, it's at a point where obviously not everything's done even inside, but like the house as a whole is in a really good place, I think. And people can come in and be like, oh, this is a really nice home. It's not like, oh, you're still getting it sorted out.
Yeah.
Which is what it was for quite a while, just as we kind of figured everything out. But yeah, that's my one. What would you say your moment of joy is from the past week?
Well, I did really love having your family there. But one, if we're talking about like one moment, and it links very well into this episode actually, is I think I was walking to work on Friday,
Yes.
And it was so cold and frosty. And I was heading to work, and it was probably about 3:30ish, and I was in the woods. And I just had this kind of big, like, overcome of emotion, because I have not really been going for walks, certainly not in the woods for such, like, not like a massively long time, but it's been a while. And just stepping back into it, and the sun was low, and it was like peeking through the trees, and it felt like there was like little forest fairies like jumping around the place. And I just had this moment of like kind of knowing that I'm where I kind of should be, and that I need to, it was like, it was this pull, like I need to start coming here and being here, because this is where I'm going to heal, and this is where I'm going to connect. And it half kind of felt like a little bit sad in the fact that I haven't got myself there. But mostly it was just kind of a deep connection and a reawakening moment. And it just felt really like magical and special.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess that's what you say. Is a moment that intense is going to have its really joyful part, but also like the slightly sad one, as you've mentioned. But I think it's just that using that as that inspiration to keep going there, moving forward. Well, I guess that might tie into what your hope for the next week is. So sorry for yoinking that, if that's what it was.
No, I was going to say, what is your, I suppose it's kind of like, what is your intention for the next week, like, or something that you want to do for yourself this week, or that I can do for you?
That's an easy, no, it's not an easy one, but it's my actual birthday later this week. So I think something I can do for myself is just, we're going to go into the city centre and go a little bit shopping, just have a really nice time. And I think what I can do for that is just not focus on any of the worries around, like, not spending too much within limits, obviously.
Yeah.
But not really focusing on money the whole time, and just kind of enjoying that experience for what it is, rather than trying to manage it in my head, which I'm not always the best at doing, because I always kind of do try and manage things in the back of my head. But it's nice if that's able to be let go of for one day. So that's my goal for this week.
Yeah, I think mine is just making sure we both feel kind of well cared for, and that you feel celebrated this week.
Yeah.
Because you so deserve it.
Oh.
But I just want you to have a really nice time, and I want to be able to be as engaged and present as I can be. So I'm just going to be really focusing on just being present this week, because there's a lot of things going on that could lead me to feel uncertainties around future. And I know we've got like the garden project and things like that, so mind could be pulled in lots of directions. So I really just want to be present this week and allow the kind of wintering slowness to maintain, and give you a really nice 24th birthday.
Gosh, 24.
Oh, shush.
Coming from the... Anyway.
26-year-old.
I didn't want to be the one
Respect
to
your elders.
That's true. That's
Anyway.
why I said student earlier. No, anyway.
All right, on that note, we are sending you lots of love and warmth for the week ahead, and we will see you next week.
See you then.